Okay, we're recording now. So, the current public forum topic is to alleviate income inequality in the United States. The U.S. government should prioritize spending on public infrastructure over spending on means-tested welfare programs. The U.S. federal government should prioritize spending on public infrastructure over spending on means-tested welfare programs, and the stipulation at the front is to alleviate income inequality. That's the purpose for doing it.
I feel like I don't know for sure, obviously, but maybe public infrastructure. I guess we're talking income equality.
Income inequality is the thing it's basically your criterion for victory. Okay, so if you were to coach this topic, you're gonna have to come up with cases for each side. You're gonna have to maybe do a little research. I sometimes start with research. Usually I start with just ideation, basically talking myself through it. But so like for example, I might run, or somebody who's running a really middle of the road case anyway, might run something like this for the neg side. That number one, income inequality is fundamentally an issue of social justice. It is one thing to say, hey, we want to help people get jobs and stuff, and that's fine. But if you're saying this is our way we're going to solve income inequality, then you're letting the crooks off the hook. That the big corporations are the evil guys. The big business is exploiting the American people and keeping all the profit for themselves as Americans' wages are going down. The only just outcome is a redistributionist one. It's not going to be, I'm sorry we stole your money. Here's a job where you can work for more money that we can also steal. Yeah. That would be let's say one of the central arguments on the neg side, which I think is harder for this resolution. So if I were to make that argument, and you were tasked with coming up with ways to defeat that argument, what possible ways might you think of?
So looking at it from a social justice perspective, or like I'm arguing against that perspective?
Yeah, you're arguing against that.
Mm-hmm.
I tell you what, let's pretend we're just having a conversation, and we're at your college. I'm this very old new freshman, and I've just joined the class, and I said, well, I finally saved up enough to afford a college education, and I'm here to learn, and I have an opinion about social justice. And I want to express it to you, Zachary, because I've heard that in college, we young people, we talk about exciting social issues. So I want to talk to you about social justice. Here's my opinion about it. I think that social justice demands that we do redistributionist policies where we tax the rich more and give the money to the poor people because, after all, it's only fair because the rich people have been exploiting the poor people for such a long time.
I would say that the entire idea, okay, so that's kind of like Marxism, right? It's kind of like the core of that argument, or I guess socialism. That relies on almost a metaphysical concept that everyone is equal in terms of like so just because someone exists, they are therefore obligated or the government is obligated to give them a standard of living without them really offering anything. Just because they exist is enough to justify that standard of living. And so that I feel like that's the kind of the crutch of that the whole redistribution of wealth.
So what's the tag? What's the actual answer? How do you tag out your answer and say this is why this is wrong? If you're going to come up with an answer,
it's wrong. It's wrong to redistribute wealth because not everyone. I'm trying to find out what I articulated exactly to convey it to them.
Here. I want to try something else if you'll tolerate it for a second, which is I want to talk to you about how argumentation theory works recover like multiple years of it in really 5 minutes and see how much you can pick up. Okay, which is basically you need to think about it as there are 3 terrains of argument. Okay, there are ground arguments, which are contention level arguments. There are contention level arguments, which are if we're talking about dogs are better than cats, and I make an argument that says dogs are better because they can help blind people and cats can't. That's a contention level argument. If I'm making a framework argument, I'm saying in this round about dogs and cats, this is a ground argument, okay? In this round about dogs and cats, we should think what's most important is whichever animal helps people the most should win the round. That's a framework argument. So my contention then is dogs help blind people. Fits with my framework, see? The meta framework argument is going to be something that is not about case at all, either as framework or contention level. It's going to be something like, well, maybe you should have won the round, but you've been spending the whole round shouting racial slurs at me, so you should lose, because we don't want to encourage that behavior in this activity, Judge, do we? That would be a meta-framework argument, because it's not in a meta-framework because it's not in the debate space. It's an argument that basically is about the discourse of the people that are making. In other words, it's not what they're saying, it's how they're saying it. Or it's an argument about fairness in education. Like, you shouldn't make that kind of argument because that kind of argument's unfair and it ruins this sport, which is a stupid theory argument, okay? But the people make those theory arguments all the time. So those are 3 terrains. Meta framework, which is caves and theory arguments, which is stuff like critiquing your discourse or saying that's not fair. It's ground arguments, which are definitional arguments that tell you what counts in the round, either as important or as legitimate. If you say dogs are better than cats because this sandwich tastes delicious, and it doesn't matter how delicious a sandwich actually is, it doesn't have any impact on the round because it's non-topical. That's a ground argument. If I say that in response to the sandwich point, I say that's non-topical, I'm making a ground argument. Right? A definitional argument about what counts. Now those are the 3 terrains. You can think of them as high, medium, low, meta framework, framework, contention. The next thing to talk about is the 6 vectors. Okay? We've got basically 6 vectors of argument that people can make. One of them is example, one of them is comparison, one of them is mechanism, one of them is appeal, and one of them is citation. Citation, appeal, comparison, example, mechanism, and what was the last one?
Inferior. I said inferior SI.
Yeah, I have terrible SI. I don't know what it is. I can't remember at the top of my head. But anyway, there's 6 vectors. So when you're dealing with an argument, the first thing you should do is figure out what kind of argument it is. So for example, if we look at the argument I made initially about the income inequality, I'm saying we should do it because it's an issue of social justice, and I'm saying that in order to achieve a just outcome, we have to rectify the theft of money from some people. So really what I'm making there is a rights argument, a deontological argument, which is going to be manifest as comparison against a model. So it's a kind of comparison argument, really. But people don't think of it as that at all. If you say, well, it's a rights violation, they don't think that's a comparison argument. They think that's some sort of, I don't know what they think it is, but really it's comparison to a model. My model, which says we shouldn't violate negative rights, should be axiomatic. It should be the thing we appeal to, okay? As we both agree with this. We both agree you can't smash toddlers' heads in with a baseball bat. That's morally wrong. Everyone agrees with this? Okay, fine. So if I can show that your position leads to that, then I'm going to win, okay? So we want to relate things to axiomatic truths when we're dealing with binary impacts. And in this case, talking about binary impact is a rights argument because you either have your rights violated or you don't. It's not like, well, this is bad because it kills 50 people, but yours is worse because it kills 100 people, so let's vote for me. That's sliding scale. You can count the impacts. When you are arguing you should vote for me because of a rights violation, you're saying it doesn't matter how much the impact is. We shouldn't do that. We have a moral imperative as a society to reject those courses of action that violate the rights of others, the negative rights of others, because otherwise we're endorsing violence. And so that's what I mean by a comparison to a model, is to talk about that abstract model that establishes rights as sacrosanct, and to demand that people who would have us evaluate the round through some other model justify how their model is better given that this model permits the least rights violations. So, this is sort of the process, the mechanics of executing the arguments is to walk through that process, okay? So your vectors, like I said, there's examples, comparison, whatever. Those things, some of them are of higher strength or lower strength, right? So the best kind of argument is a mechanism argument. If you can show that X has an attribute of Y, and things that have an attribute of Y in context Z always produce outcome A, and link it to whatever your opponent's argument is, that's how you defeat people's arguments really easily. So you say, well, look, here's a perfect example of this argument. You're saying we should raise the minimum wage because we want to increase people's income. But Seattle shows us, this is an example, you're referencing an example first to prove a mechanism. Okay, so you say, City of Seattle.
A vector, an example would be a vector.
Yeah, the vector would be an example, and then you have two vectors in this. An example first, and then a mechanism argument. So the example is Seattle. In Seattle, they passed a minimum wage increase, and what it caused people to do is all the population of poor people who were already getting money from the government, their money from the government was now being threatened by their increased income. So instead of getting off of government assistance, they asked for a reduction in hours from their boss. So functionally, the minimum wage had one impact, which is to lower productivity. Now everybody was getting paid more to do less because they didn't want to lose their free stuff from the government. Because means-tested welfare is a terrible idea, right? So basically, my point is, you're going to say, okay, well, they're talking about a program that involves raising the minimum wage, and they're claiming that that's going to increase the income, and that's a good thing. But the reality is, what we see when you have a population of people who are addicted to means-tested welfare programs, those sort of sensible policies, like raising the minimum wage, backfire. That's why we should counterfund welfare programs so that we can do more meaningful things like raise the minimum wage. You might argue that, right? So in that case, what you're doing is you're saying, here's a mechanism that precludes you from winning this point, and in fact produces outcomes that are good for me, and it's built off of your point. So you made the point that we should raise the minimum wage, but what my opponent failed to factor in was this additional mechanism that's attached to this machine that they didn't realize was there that does what they say. Yes, you do get your $5 in benefits. However, it also gives everybody cancer. Right? So that's basically the gist of the debate.
Mechanism argument.
Yeah, that's the mechanism, right? So what you do is you run through a debate round, you identify the vector, you understand where it's strong and where it's weak as a vector, and then you address it accordingly. You want to generally try to use mechanism arguments, and you want to use turns, which is to say, you don't want to say, no, my opponent's argument isn't true. You don't want to say, no, my opponent doesn't make as many impacts as he says he makes. You want to say, my opponent is totally right about this. Unfortunately, he failed to account for this, and that causes all of his good impacts that he thought were good to actually be bad impacts. So he's got a bunch of harms on his flow now. Or you say, he caused all of his good impacts, they actually belong to me now. Because the impact that he said was good is actually bad for him and good for me, so I'm going to take over his impacts and come over to my side of the flow right here. And if you've got conditionality mechanisms built into the responses, then basically that's how you win rounds, That's how you are the better debate coach, is being smarter like that. So
is it best to always provide an example? Like, say you count with the mechanism argument. Is it best to always provide an example with that argument?
Well, you need to establish the mechanism somehow. So you either do it with an example, or you could do it with a lot of times you'll say you can add on a vector by going okay, well, but here's the thing. We already know that when human beings are threatened with jail, they are less likely to perform a given action. And so while you're saying let's criminalize behavior X, the reality is there's a lot of circumstances in which behavior X is needed to achieve desirable outcome Y. And now you put all those people at risk of being jailed. So as a consequence, they'll be less likely to do behavior X, true, but then that will also eliminate behavior Y, which is more valuable than the thing that you're getting rid of with behavior X. In that case, you're adding a mechanism, but you're not actually giving an example at all. Right? Your example is human nature, the fact that people don't like to be locked in cages. I mean, you don't have to really prove that, right? It's just sort of, cage lock threats do deter crime. A little bit, at least.
So okay, let's put you in my position. You're me. All right, you're in college, and our new friend comes along and provides that opinion that he has that we should, it's more moral to redistribute the wealth of the upper class and whatnot. How would you respond to that using a mechanism?
I'd say using a mechanism. Well, I'd say the mechanism in this. I wouldn't use exactly a mechanism here. I would say, well, first I'd say this. I guess. Do you think that somebody that earning relates to fairness? Do you believe that earning relates to fairness at all, or just a little bit, or what?
So that like earning money would be fair?
Well, what I mean by that is, if I earn $10, does that matter in the equation of who gets to have that $10?
I guess, yeah, it would matter.
Now, if I already had $10 and I earn another $10, does that matter in the equation of who gets that second $10?
Yeah, because the person who earned it should be able to get it.
Okay, so old guy who's advocating for social justice, are you saying that in all cases, the people who are rich did not earn their money? They don't deserve it. In all cases, are there some rich people who do deserve their money or not? Could I earn it enough to justify being richer than other people because I've done so much more productive and useful work for society that I deserve to be richer? Is that possible, or are you just avowing that whole perspective? You got to pin them down like that. Get them to understand. Get them to say the core issue here is if you turn it around. So you say like, okay, so let's say you came up with a really brilliant idea. And you had to work really hard on it, and you earned a lot of money from it. Would you prefer to give it, let's say even if you think you should be fair and equitable, would you prefer to give it away yourself to people who you think are deserving, or would you prefer to have it stolen from you and given it away by central authority? If you had the choice, let's say you knew you were going to pay taxes, but you got to choose what those taxes were spent on. If you could dictate to the government, you must spend my taxes on this. Would you choose that, or would you let the government decide?
I think that, well, personally,
I'm saying these are the sort of questions you got to ask the guy, you know. But what you eventually work up to is, with what justification do you use violence against people by either stealing their property or justifying jailing them if they don't give it to you? How do you justify the violence that necessarily is implicit in stealing people's property?
Yeah, I see that. So what type of argument would this be? Would this be a mechanism?
Well, I'm doing what you were saying earlier, which is to answer your question, I'd need to be able to find out. I have to walk the guy down a path, right? I have to walk him to double bind, right? So I walk him to. I have to agree with this thing that Eric just said because it's so obviously unavoidably true. If I don't agree with that, then I'm a horrible person. Okay, can we start with? Can we at least agree that you should never bash toddlers' heads in with baseball bats? Can we agree with that? Okay. Then you have to walk them up. Well, why not? Isn't it okay if it's utilitarianly? Yeah. But what if we could save 100 native peoples in the Amazon rainforest by bashing the heads in of 10 rich white suburban kids in America? Should we do it? That's what I'm, as a deontologist, that's what I'm asking a utilitarian. Well, why not? So when you go to the doctors and you're sick a little bit, but gosh, there's been a car accident and there's 4 people lying on the table, each of them needs one organ, should the doctor go, oh, sorry, dude, and kill you and take your organs and save the other 4 people? After all, he saves 4 people, and you're just one. How exactly are you justifying this particular violence you're using? You are using violence for sure. When you say, let's have more redistribution, you're saying, I don't care. You earned it. I'm going to plunder it from you. You earn things by virtue of the fact that it's your labor. You own your labor, or you own your whatever it is you provide. Like I'm not selling my labor. I'm selling I am selling my labor, but I'm selling it directly to the client. So I don't have a owner in between me and the clients. But the point is, if I own my labor and I do the work, why shouldn't I keep the money? At what point does it cease to be okay to be making money? Like, if you're working in a job, Mr. Redistributionist guy, and you're making, now you've suddenly got a raise at your painting job. You're no longer making $15 an hour. You're making $30 an hour. Your company's kicking ass, and you got a blue collar job. You just a high school diploma, but you're fucking making bank. Now is it okay? Now you want the government to take 30% of your money? All of a sudden, you don't really want that anymore, right? You wanted that when it didn't affect you. But why should your comfort be so much more important than somebody else's? Why should you be allowed to steal his money because he earned more than you did?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I badly explained it earlier, but I guess like what the core of my argument I was trying to make was, or what initially came to me was that, like, I know the view of like redistributing wealth. It kind of implies that everyone without that wealth deserves that for some reason there is an intrinsic value in every one of us that deserves to have a standard of living, no matter what we do.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
That's pretty much that's like the first thing that came to my head.
You're right. We should attack it that direction. You go, well, do they have a right to this money? Where does that come from? That's a better way to attack it, for sure. You're at that. See, that's smart, because what you said is much more offense prone, right? You don't want to be trying to say because it's this way, because it's the only fair way. You want to say, pin them to a position that will allow you to double bind them. So you go, well, do they have a right to this money or not? And then they're going to try to evade it. Well, they have a right. Everyone has a right to a good, decent life. Well, what does that mean exactly? What do you mean by right? Because the definition of a right is that which confers a duty upon another. If you have a right to free speech, that means everyone else has a duty to not interfere with your free speech. If you have a right to remain silent, that means you can't be tortured to talk. So the duty of non-interference. So as a consequence, a lot of people use the word really loosely and they don't know what they mean by it, right? So I attack there if they're implying that an entitlement or an expectation, as I prefer to call it, because they're not entitled to shit, an expectation, an unwarranted expectation, they just refer to it as a right.
Yeah, that's the one thing I don't understand from when it comes to the left arguing for Bernie Sanders, exactly like that's going on right now, especially in my generation. Like at my college, if I just saying anything against Sanders' campaign, I'd be afraid of getting assaulted. No joke. Like people are so so it's such a leftist environment. But to me, it just seems it's kind of like it goes back to the right thing. Like what is there some metaphysical principle that gives all of us a right to a standard of living? I don't know how that conclusion is drawn.
Right. It's a mistake to think there are positive rights that are not contractual. You have a positive right when you go to McDonald's and you order your food and you pay for it. At that point, you have a positive right to the food. But that's a contractual positive right that you got by buying it, right? And same opposite, if you go to Denny's and sit down and eat, and then you don't have to pay till you leave, right? Well, then they have a contractual positive right for you to pay them before you leave because they've already given you the food, you've already eaten it, so you have an obligation to pay. Those are positive rights, and they're between individual agents or an agent in a business or something like that. And they don't persist beyond the duration of the contract.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are actual positive rights. We don't usually refer to them as positive rights, but that's what people don't understand, that if they are going to talk about positive rights, they need to talk about those things, not like, I have a right to free Wi-Fi. I want more free stuff.
Yeah.
Come on, federal government, give me something else. What do I want this time? I want some food stamps, I want some free lunch. Oh, a Head Start program for my kids? That's great. Wow, that's so wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. The idea of like it's the kind of like socialist view of it, redistributing wealth and everything, and putting more funds into it, like a welfare state kind of, is very very popular among my peers, especially.
Yeah, it's always popular
almost
with the young.
intimidating too. Wait, what did you just say?
I said it's always popular with the young.
It is, yeah. I consider myself currently. I would consider myself a libertarian, but I consider myself pretty liberal throughout the past few years of my life, and that was mainly because it was just out of apathy. I didn't really have an opinion on things because it didn't affect me, But now, as I,
you probably just interpreted the Republicans as being dumb and jingoistic, and so you're like, well, I guess I'm a Democrat then.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, well, it's based on like my parents, pretty much. Like they are. I mean, it's Kentucky. Like people here, I mean, they're just very, very fundamentalist Christian, conservative, etc. And that was the only thing I'd been exposed to when it comes to. It was either that or the liberal view to me for so long, and I just wasn't aware of all of the aspects of politics and etc.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reason I tend to argue against the left is because everybody I know, like I'm in a community, I'm in California, and all the sort of college educated professionals are all liberals. They're all supporting Bernie Sanders. Like, everybody that I work with is Bernie Sanders. So I have to be the gospel truth bringer because they're delusional. They can't answer any of my questions meaningfully, but they still persist in their beliefs. Like homie back here. He's a Bernie Sanders supporter. But look, here's the thing about Bernie Sanders is he does seem like a real nice guy. And I do have a song about him. In which I explain, as you have here, that he's a socialist who's confused and he's going to destroy the economy. So you could maybe, what you should do is when you see your Bernie Sanders supporting young college friends, be like, hey, there's a really great song about Bernie Sanders. They're like, nah.
It got in that playlist?
Yeah, it's in my, I think it's in the best freestyles playlist. Also, it's in it's on the album. But it's got 4 thumbs down right away because when I first put it up there, it like got Bernie Sanders traffic until YouTube figured out that it wasn't really about Bernie Sanders. And then, but it was legit. It was legit to say it because I always do it fair, but by a loophole, kind of, like that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Bernie Sanders people voted it down and they hated it and they left mean comments and stuff. But it's a good song.
Which playlist is it on? Again?
Well, host Eric learns to talk. I believe it's called El Nino now.
Okay.
The song is called El Nino. I took the Bernie Sanders out of the title because
El Nino my ass.
Yeah, El Nino my ass. That one. So.
Oh my god, that's got forward. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's call it a night. Yeah. Let's have another.
It's been a good discussion.
Yeah, let's have another conversation some other time. Coming up. And I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to deal with this video, which is depending on how this last one should be quick and easy. We could put this one up right away, probably, and then the other chunks I'm going to have to deal with in Premiere Pro and see how much of a hassle it's going to be. I'll probably have to cut it because when you have a super long video, I mean your computer just goes at a snail pace, so it's going to take a little while to process that. But this one right here should probably go up pretty soon. And thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
This has been very enjoyable. Yeah, I'd definitely be down to do this again.
Cool. So then we'll follow up sometime in the near future. All right? Nice talking to you, man.
Have a good night, man.
Talk to you later.
See ya.